So this year we participated in a very special kind of randonneering event. This was called a Flèche, and the Flèche was hosted by the Ontario Randonneurs. Now, what made this event so special was that this was the first time in the history of the Ontario Randonneurs that they had a total of 9 Flèche teams and at least 5 trace teams. I will tell you a little bit more about what's the difference between a Flèche team and a trace team a little bit later in the video. This is not the only first for the Ontario Randonneurs, and this too I'll tell you a little bit more about later in the video. Now, just to talk about what essentially the Flèche is, the Flèche is an event in which there are a number of different teams that ride a unique and individual course from different parts of either a country or province towards a central point. In this particular Flèche, the teams rode from various starting points across the province of Ontario and all converged towards the city of Peterborough, which was the final destination. Each of the Flèche teams was allowed to have a minimum of 3 machines and a maximum of 5 machines. That means you can either have a tandem with 4 individual bicycles as a total team, or you can have 2 tandems and 3 individual bicycles. So you can see that the number of participants in each team can vary according to the individual team's requirements. On the other hand, the trace teams had a minimum number of at least 2 machines per team and a maximum of 6 machines per team. So once again, they could have perhaps 2 tandems and 4 individual bicycles to make up their total team, depending on what they chose to do. There was a difference in distance between the trace and the Flèche teams. The Flèche teams had to ride a minimum distance of at least 360 kilometers to get to the final destination city, whereas the trace teams had to ride a minimum distance of at least 200 kilometers to get to the final destination. Now, in no particular order, I'm going to name the various teams that participated in this specific Flèche. These were Team Flèche Wound, Team Warriors, Team Aerodynamics, Team Chamois and Shenanigans, Team Breast Friends, Team Prairie Ventoux. Now, this photograph has got 2 teams in it. On the right, there's the team Take the High Road, and on the left of the photograph, there's team Take the Low Road. Then there's team Airbnb Guys, and then the trace teams were Team Leave No Trace, Team Trace Elements, Team TBN Crazies, Team Trace of Base, and Team Rando Occasionally. Now, I just love the individual names of each of these teams. It helped to contribute to that fun element that is part of riding a Flèche. Now, planning a Flèche is no easy task because it takes a lot of experience, because there are many different rules that you have to follow to have a successful Flèche team, and you also have to have a really good understanding and knowledge of the geographic location in which you host the Flèche. Now, the 3 prairie randonneurs that were taking part in this event were Jermaine, Ed, and myself. Now, we live in the province of Saskatchewan, which is at least almost 2,700 kilometers away from where the Flèche was being held. And we had never ridden in Ontario in any capacity before. So we had no idea about the geography, about all the requirements for control points, as well as where to find food and drinks, and even how to get to the destination city. So we were at a huge disadvantage when it came to planning this event. So what we did was we reached out to one of the organizers of the Flèche, and this was a guy by the name of Fred Shannon, and Fred was super helpful. He had first of all hosted an information session as to what a Flèche is and how to go about riding a Flèche as a Facebook Live event. And then once we reached out to him and explained our predicament that we would love to be part of it, but didn't know how to actually go about designing a course or a route for the Flèche, he put us in contact with a really great guy by the name of Timothy Ormond, who was the vice president of the Toronto chapter of the Ontario Randonneurs. And Timothy just took us on without any question. He designed an amazing course for us, and all we had to do was basically pitch up in Toronto and ride together with him and the past president of the Toronto chapter, Marty. So we flew out very early on the day before the Flèche started, so that once we got to Toronto, we had enough time to have a good rest, assemble our bicycles, prepare everything, so that by the time it came to the start of the Flèche, we were able to do so without any delays. Marty and Tim met us promptly at our hotel next to the airport.
But at first we have to ride to the bike path, right? So that stretch of road, I'm expecting it to be quite busy because it's all airport traffic. So that's going to be about 3 kilometers, and then we'll get on the bike path and it'll be smooth sailing from there, right?
Okay.
Any questions for me? Nope, we're just going to follow you.
We're just going to follow you.
How far are you going? 371.
Once Tim and Marty had completed their introductions and a brief debrief of what is expected from us during the Flèche, we got on with the business of riding to the destination city of Peterborough. Our route initially took us on the outskirts of the Toronto International Airport to a very quiet cycle path which followed the Etobicoke Creek, heading northeast to the outskirts of the city of Brampton. Now, the Flèche Nationale originates from the original event, which is called the Flèche Veloceo, which was first created by the Odeille Club Parisien way back in 1947. And the idea at that time was that the riders would ride in teams from the city of Paris to Provence. This event was usually held over the Easter weekend. Teams were allowed to depart from Paris as early as 6 p.m. on Good Friday evening and as late as 10 a.m. the next morning on Saturday, which was Easter Saturday. They then had at least 24 hours in which they had to ride all the way to Provence. Eventually the rules changed and teams were then allowed to depart from various locations across France but still converge towards Provence. The distance that they had to cover was then reduced to a minimum distance of at least 360 kilometers. And it is on these rules that the Flèche Nationale was then created. Now, with regards to Flèche Nationale, Marty shared some really interesting information about the history of the Flèche Nationale. I was not aware of this, and so when he told me about it, it was just amazing.
Saying that Canada was one of the first to hold a Flèche.
It was the first, our club, it was, at the time it was called Toronto Randonneurs, and it became Randonneurs Ontario, was the first club outside of France to do Flèche. And Flèche outside of France is called Flèche Nationale. So in 1985, Toronto Randonneurs were the first to do it. So it's a little bit of randonneuring trivia.
And therefore it seems so appropriate that we have the opportunity to go and ride with this particular club, the Ontario Randonneurs, at their record-breaking event with such a huge number of teams in a club that hosted the first international Flèche event. From the Etobicoke Creek, we rode northeast towards the city of Brampton. Brampton was our first control point of the Flèche. In Brampton, we stopped very briefly to pick up some food supplies and drinks, have a short rest before we started on the next leg of the journey.
And
What's the time, Tim?
8 p.m.
Okay.
And
8 p.m.
that's when I put our estimated time of arrival. So it's 8. That's what I wrote in here.
Exactly.
So they were right on
Well
schedule.
done.
Yeah, it was
Well
perfect.
done.
And how many kilometers did we cover?
We've so far done 33 kilometers.
Very nice.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
3 and 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. But it was really very technical and windy. And
Yeah. Okay, so
Thank
good
you.
work, everyone. We're on track. And
Thank you.
so I scheduled we could take 30 minutes here to get supplies and whatever if we need. You know?
Okay.
So I might get some water myself.
from Brampton, we headed further northeast to the town of Schomberg. Now, there are some really interesting rules that are related to hosting a Fleche event. The ACP has recognized that not all clubs are able to host their Fleche during the Easter weekend because some countries are still in the grips of winter, as is what happens with us in Canada. Very often our roads are still snow covered and we just can't get out to actually ride these Fleche events during the Easter weekend. So the ACP has extended the time frame in which we are allowed to complete the Fleche event, and we can have the Fleche as late as the end of May. So we rolled into Schomberg slightly later that evening, just as the light was fading. We stopped at McDonald's to have a bite, rest and refuel before heading back onto the road.
Yeah.
Where are we?
So we're in Schomberg. It is 10:30. We're perfectly on schedule. We arrived in town 15 minutes ahead of schedule. We're just going to be leaving shortly. Everyone's in good spirits. Next control is Virginia Beach. We're aiming to get there by 3:30, and we're going to have good spirits all the way there. The weather's gorgeous. Couldn't have asked for a better night, and the company's great too, so it's all good.
Night had fully enveloped us by the time we left Schomberg and headed further northeast. We soon went through an area just northeast of Schomberg called the Holland Marsh, and what was done by the early settlers was that they had drained this marshy area and created some of the most fertile farming area in the entire Canada. And as we rode through this area, we could smell all the produce that was being grown in this area. We could smell the onions, we could smell the garlic, we could smell everything that was being grown there, and the aromas were just spectacular. We continued to ride through this area further northeast to our next checkpoint, which was Virginia Beach. Now, an interesting aspect about the Flèche Nationale is that each individual team captain has to design a unique route. Now, no two teams are allowed to follow the exact same route. They all have to have a unique route that takes them to the final destination point. Now, if two teams do follow the same route, they have to make sure that they are separated by at least an hour, so they are not allowed to ride together during the event. Now, we knew that there's at least one other team that was following a route very similar to what we were actually following. And we kept a very close watch out to make sure that they did not catch up with us, and we managed to stay ahead of them for most of the way. And just when we thought that they were going to catch us, they then branched north to take a slightly longer route to what we were following. Now at Virginia Beach, we met with Ed's partner, Sarah, who helped us to refuel by providing us the most delicious, juicy pizza that we had had for the entire. In Virginia Beach, we found a picnic bench and just sat outside in the middle of the early morning hours and had a great meal together, share stories and get to know each other a lot better.
It's, I don't know, 1:30
No.
ish.
I think it's almost 2, isn't it?
2? Is it 2?
So Tim, you can tell us where are we?
What is the name of this town?
We're waiting for the chip truck to open.
I can't remember the name of this town, but we're on Highway 48. I've never seen Highway 48 this quiet ever before in my life. It's usually crazy busy, but we're just crossing it, so no matter any case. The time is, it's just almost 2 a.m. And we've done, how many kilometers have we done?
130.
130 kilometers. And we're just on the south shore of Lake Simcoe, right? So we're going to be, for the next few hours, we're going to be going along the south shore and the east shore of Lake Simcoe.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that when we're going north on the east shore, that we'll get some nice views of the moon over the lake. So I'm hoping, but I'm not sure where the moon is right now. Yeah.
So we then departed from Virginia Beach, closely hugging the shores of Lake Simcoe in a northeasterly direction. So we didn't actually make it very far from Virginia Beach. We rode about 16 kilometers to the town of Beaverton, and in Beaverton, the urge to sleep was just too overwhelming. Now, our team leader, Timothy, he read the situation really well, and he recognized that we needed to sleep. So he gave the command. He said, okay, guys, you've got to find a place to sleep. Just sleep wherever you feel comfortable. Get some sleep, get some rest, so that we can push on to complete this event. So we all piled into the CIBC. The CIBC is essentially one of the Canadian banks. They have a little glass encased vestibule in which there's an ATM with some grass mats on the floor, and we just piled in there, and we all just had a really good sound sleep for at least 45 minutes, only to be woken up by the sound of a passing train. So we slept for a maximum of about 45 minutes. Now, the Flèche has got very specific rules, and one of the rules was that you were not allowed to stop at any point on the Flèche, at any of the controls, or at anywhere else along the route for more than 2 hours. So that means that you were not allowed to sleep for more than 2 hours, or at least stop and rest for any other reason for more than 2 hours. Once we were up, our team leader, Tim, said, okay guys, it's time to go, and off we went with the next leg of the journey.
How are you feeling though?
I really was tired. I was just very tired. Very happy.
Our next control point was the town of Brechin, and we checked into Brechin to the Tim Hortons to have a really good, healthy breakfast. Now, one of the interesting rules of the Flèche is that each team must ride at least a distance of 360 kilometers. You can, of course, ride much further if you want to, but if you decide to ride much further, you have to make sure that within that 24-hour period, you cover at least 80% of the distance that you have indicated that you will be riding. If you do not get that 80% distance within the 24-hour period, unfortunately, it means that you were not successful at completing the Flèche.
Okay, so where are we at the moment?
We are in Brechin. We arrived here at 6 a.m. and we're roughly at the halfway mark, and 6 a.m. is roughly half the time, so we're making good time, and it's a good place to be. The sun's coming up, so that's raising all our spirits, and yeah, we're gonna end up in the Canadian Shield by the time we reach the next control. So the world is gonna look completely different up there.
From Brechin, we rode further northeast once again, and I know you must be thinking, when are these guys going to turn around to get back to Peterborough? But there seemed to be no intention to do that. We just kept going further northeast. By this time, we had left the original temperate area of Ontario and had entered a region called the Canadian Shield. Now, the Canadian Shield is formed by huge plates of rock interspersed by little lakes, as well as lots of conifers that make the most amazing scenery. So we eventually took some photographs at Head Lake because the scenery was just amazing.
Hi. That's a nice picture.
Now, the ACP encourages each of the teams to train together so that you can get to learn the strengths and weaknesses of each of the team members. And in this way, you will then hopefully have the opportunity to adapt so that you can ride as cohesively as possible to complete the event as a team. At least 3 members of the team have to complete the event for the team to be accredited with a completion of the Flèche. So it's really in your interest to try to make sure that as many of the team members in the team actually get to the finish line. And this can be really difficult because once you've been riding for 24 hours with very little opportunity to sleep, emotions start to run high, personalities start to become more abrupt, people become a bit more irritable, there can be friction in a team, and sometimes some teams have been known to completely split up and not complete the event. So I think that is perhaps one of the biggest challenges of riding the Flèche, as that you have to ride together under sometimes very difficult circumstances, depending on the amount of sleep deprivation, the level of fitness, the level of motivation of each of the individual members in the team. We, of course, had an amazing team leader who read each of the different situations really well and helped to encourage all of us to make sure that we were successful at getting to the end of this Flèche. We eventually got to the town of Kinmont, where we stopped to have a really hearty lunch, have a good rest before we tackled the final leg of the journey to Peterborough.
So we're just leaving Kinmount now. We're about to head off into some of the most remote part of our trip. We're gonna head east to a place called Gooderham, and then we're gonna cut south and just follow the road all the way back to Peterborough. But during that time, there's not gonna be a lot to see, just lots of lakes, cottages, and trees, and rocks.
We stopped in the town of Gooderham to do a photo control at a sculpture along the side of the road.
Just gonna get a picture of this statue. Well, it proves that we are here because the way I did the controls, having one in Kinmount and then another one in Buckhorn, technically we have no way of proving that we came here, right?
Like we could have taken a shortcut except for our track.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an outdated mindset, but it's still in the rules.
Once we had gone through Gooderham, taken our photo control, we started to head south along a really beautiful wide highway, and it seemed as though we were descending for the next 60 kilometers. We stopped in Buckhorn, which was our final control of the ride.
So tell us the situation. What's the gravity of the situation?
Well, I think that we've been riding well, we've been riding consistently, and our distance was a realistic distance, and we are now in the situation where we have just over 2 hours to complete under 40 kilometers, and we're all feeling good, and we're just taking a little break, and we're going to finish the job. So it's good. We're in Buckhorn right now, and we've got less than 40k, something like 38k left to go, so feels good. We're all happy to feel like we're going to finish on time, so it's good.
You're a great leader.
Thanks, man. I mean, I was just thinking how lucky.
Just after we left Buckhorn, we came up to the 22-hour mark of the event. The 22-hour mark is a really important part of the Flèche, and you have to document the distance that you've covered at 22 hours. From 22 hours, you then have to get to as close to your destination as possible by 24 hours. And that final 2 hours, you have to ride a distance of at least 25 kilometers. Then rode through the beautiful premises of the University of Trent. After the lock, it was just a very short ride of less than 5 kilometers to get to the final destination, and we rode through some really beautiful bike paths to get to the Holiday Inn, which was the destination point in Peterborough to complete the ride. Now, at the end of the ride, it was really great to just get there and actually see all the teams that had already arrived there, and to welcome all the teams that came in after us. So most teams were able to get there just either before or after the 6 o'clock cutoff time. Teams that, of course, had left later in the day, such as the Saturday morning at 10 a.m., would only be anticipated to arrive in Peterborough by the Sunday morning at 10 a.m. So there's actually a very long period in which you can anticipate different teams to arrive at the destination point. Now, one of the rules that the ACP had set out was that you can arrive at any of those times over a period of 24 hours, but you have to make sure that your representative or your team leader that has all your brevet cards is able to provide those or give those to the Flèche organizer on the Sunday afternoon, so that you can then be considered to be a finisher of the Flèche event. So after the event, we had a huge get-together to have drinks, food, and an opportunity to just be able to mingle with everybody else, so we could get to meet all the amazing randonneurs that were taking part in both the Flèche event as well as the trace event.
Oh wait, no, it's the opposite. We were like, we made it. We kicked butt. Yeah. All right.
So tell us about the last section. How did it go?
It went well because we worked together and kept things consistent, and we just kept on plugging away at it. And so at the end, we didn't need to rush. There wasn't any panic. There wasn't any stress. There was a bit of stress, but it was just a bit. And then once we got onto the river, on the Tomby River, we all felt really good, and we knew we were going to be fine. And yeah, and the final 10-20K of the ride was just very peaceful, and we just took our time. Yeah, it was good.
So we finally made it back to Peterborough.
Yeah. Well, we didn't make it back here. We made it here.
We made it too, yeah.
You know, and at this destination, I was thinking, like, this is a way better destination than where we started from, right? Like,
absolutely.
Pearson International. It was exciting, and it was interesting.
It was different. I'd never start a bike ride from Pearson.
And I was really happy with the bike path. I think it worked out well for us.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so all in all, I'm happy with the route, and I'm happy that we succeeded. And planning.
And we want to say thanks for the amazing route and the amazing leadership and camaraderie from yourself and Marty.
Well,
thank you so much.
Tim did a great job.
Yeah,
right?
no, he was so calm under all conditions.
I would strongly recommend that if you ever want to do a Flèche, that you consider coming to Ontario to actually ride with the Ontario Randonneurs. Not only do they have a really well organized event, the people that organize the Flèche are extremely knowledgeable about the Flèche and are extremely helpful. So if ever you do decide to do a Flèche, please consider the Ontario Randonneurs. Well, remember, if you've enjoyed this video, please press that like button. And if you want to see similar videos about other randonneuring events that we've had during the past year, please subscribe to this channel. Until the next time I see you, please ride safely.